All right, welcome back to another episode of the Pearl Snap Tactical Podcast, the show that gives you the tips and tools you need to make yourself stronger, faster, and harder to kill. Still recorded live from an undisclosed location south of the Mason-Dixon line. I am joined with me, the great Matt Larson. He is also known as the father of the Army's combative program. Welcome to the show, Matt.
Hi, good to be here.
Yeah, man. After a little technical difficulty of me basically kicking us both out of the out of the show, now hey, we're here. We're here.
Not a combo guy, right?
Yeah, for sure. So anyway, hey, thanks for taking time out. I'm really excited to talk to you about some stuff. But first, before we start, there's a post. You're a prolific blogger, I guess, for one of the many things that you do. And I came across one of your posts. I want to talk about that. But before we do that, would you introduce yourself to the audience and kind of give a little bit of your background?
Sure. So my name is Matt Larson. I was in the service for a really long time. I started out in the Marine Corps when I was 17 years old. I was in the 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, and stationed in the Far East most of the time. And then after 4 years in the Marines, I switched over to the Army and was in the 75th Ranger Regiment for around 12 years, something slightly under that. And I was in 175 for about 6 years. I was in 275 for about 4 or so. My last job in the regiment was I was the RASP 2 NCOIC, so that's in charge of evaluating the non-commissioned officers and officers that come into the regiment from elsewhere in the force. And then I was actually in that job because I was a Kung Fu boy, because I was the Combatives program started with my squad when I was in 275, and then it grew to the platoon, to the company, to the battalion, then to the whole Ranger Regiment, and then out to the Army. So as that grew, I was a Ranger instructor for a while, only to implement the program, and then started the Army Combative School. And then I did that for the rest of the time I was in the Army, and then got out and did that again as a civilian, intermittently with contracting in various places around the world. And so now I'm the director of combatives at West Point, and I teach combat psychology. And combat psychology is increasingly what I really focus on, because it turns out that the hand-to-hand combat stuff was always mostly about psychology. It's not that the hand-to-hand combat isn't important, but we're not going to win the next war because our soldiers are better hand-to-hand combat fighters, but we are going to win because of what it takes to be a better hand-to-hand combat fighter. And so that plays into all the other aspects of what it takes to be a good soldier, a good man, a good citizen.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Are you familiar with Tim Larkin's work?
A little. I try to read broadly in the subject,
So I had him on the show last year, and so his background. So he came up through the Navy and got hurt in buds, but kind of helped develop the Navy SEALs combatives program. And so what he told me, I thought was interesting, is he said, originally it's not like they were trying to, and this is back in the 80s, I guess, but it's not like they were just trying to figure out some self-defense system for these guys, but they had a CQB problem of when they were boarding ships and they were going into these tight hatches and dudes like taking their weapons from them or tying them up. And so it really, the origin of their combatives problem, came through a CQB problem, and it was them trying to find a system that would address that. What's the origin point for the Army's system? Did they have a problem they were trying to solve, or is there something akin to that?
Yeah, so what I would say is, first off, let's address the verbiage, okay? Because self-defense is not a soldier task.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So I never ever refer to anything about combatives as self-defense, because self-defense seeds the initiative.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not the way to train warriors.
Right.
The warriors have to seize the initiative when there's a conflict on, because that's how you control people. It's not different in life than it is in a game of chess, right? How do you control your opponent in a game of chess while you attack? And when you attack, then they have to respond to you, and that's what the initiative means at every level of battle, all the way from individual hand-to-hand combat all the way through, hundreds of thousands of people maneuvering around, the world, right? So with that being said, I would say that the emphasis wasn't really even that, although the forcing factor that makes hand-to-hand combat happen on the battlefield is small spaces. So, for example, was there more hand-to-hand combat in World War I or World War II? Well, the answer is World War I, because you were fighting in trenches. And if you can just imagine how it plays out, right? If you're a bunch of men in fighting positions, like foxhole type fighting positions on a hill in open warfare, and the enemy starts laying down scunion on you. So it's indirect fire and then plunging fire, grazing fire, and then they start their assault across your position. Most people when they're scared of dying like that, will leave. So when you get on the objective, there's not that many people.
Yeah.
If they can flee, if you're using overwhelming force. And the ones that they were pinned in place because they couldn't move without getting killed, right? So that's the opposite when you're in, for example, a trench. Because getting up out of the trench means you're subject to grazing fire, blah, blah, blah. The trench is the safest place, so they remain. And then you have to fight them in there. And that same exact thing happens in an urban environment. Imagine we're sitting in a room someplace and there's scunion all around. It's a war zone, right? And we're in this little room. Well, what's happening on the other side of that wall right there? Well, we don't know. For all we know, there's guys like setting up a breaching charge to come through and get me, right? Yeah. But while I'm in here, it's like I'm in a cocoon and I feel safe. And if I go out the door, then I'm out in the war and I might get killed. So that means that when you're clearing buildings and whatnot, there are frequently people in the room that you go into. And how big are rooms in the world? They're not as big as they are in America, right? So you go through the door into a room in Iraq or Afghanistan. That room's probably 8 or 10 feet deep max. That means you're like 2 steps to the far end of the room. If things don't go exactly right, you're fighting them, right? Like what I always say is when you enter an 8 by 10 room, it's not a marksmanship contest happening in there. It's a fight. And it's going to be about who smashes who against the wall, who can bring their weapons to bear, etc. And now imagine the SEALs problem, because passageways, all that stuff in ships, you're doing like an underway takedown or something like that. Some of the missions they get are very confined spaces. So therefore, hand-to-hand would be like a major portion. I would say that you cannot claim to be proficient at close quarters battle unless you are an experienced hand-to-hand fighter. And that means integrated with your tools, like you have to be able to dominate them so they can't get to their tools and you can get to yours, and you and your buddies get the idea. So that's like a prerequisite to being proficient at close quarters battle, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So just to kind of belabor that point, imagine when the war started in Iraq and Afghanistan, the literal doctrine across all the forces was when you went into a room, you would either, if you were armed with a sidearm and your weapon malfunctions, you would transition to your sidearm, right? Or if you weren't, you would take a knee, then your other men on your team would shoot over your head, and then you would stay down until they pulled you up so they wouldn't shoot you in the back of the head, right?
Yep.
Okay, so now picture that in a 10-foot deep room.
Yeah.
And those are both stupid plans. Like they're just stupid, right? Like it's not like they're just not viable. They're dumb, right? Like you're going to take a knee at the foot of the bad guy that you're fighting. No, you're going to smash into him. You're going to dominate the pummel. You're going to, and then you're going to figure out how to get your weapon out, blah, blah, blah. So, the reason we have that is because people don't want to face the fact that it is a fight. Like the Army's about fighting. That's it. It's not about anything else. And certainly the infantry or any sort of special operations unit, it's about fighting, right? Like if you're not a proficient fighter, then you're not a good soldier.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So so let me ask you this. So for someone who's not ever been in the military, or maybe they are in the military, but they haven't had a chance to go through a combatives program, how would you differentiate combatives from martial arts, MMA, fill in the blank? What's the difference there?
Well, there's two levels of analysis here. Okay. So the first one is, what's the difference between the skills you're going to learn or you need to learn? And the second one is, what is the difference between how you teach them?
Mm-hmm.
So on the skills you're going to learn, civilians typically don't need hand-to-hand combat skill. And, in America, my dad's 83 years old, typical American. He's an electrician, been a working man his whole life. Probably hasn't been in a fight since he was in junior high school. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And so any martial arts, any kind of training that he would have done all that time, it would have just been for entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that means is, all across America, you have people who are, training to fight with katanas. And it doesn't have to be real. And it doesn't have to be real because they're not going to get accosted by ninjas on the way to their car at the mall, right? So so they're just doing it for other reasons. They're doing it because they like to. It's fun. It's a hobby. They might enjoy the cultural aspects. Lots of great reasons.
Yeah.
I'm not denigrating any of that, right? Like, it's like at a certain level, though, it doesn't matter what they're doing, right? They could just as easily have the hobby of skydiving or playing tennis, and those are viable hobbies as well, right? So with that being said, there's no bullshit factor. It doesn't have to be real, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so in a tactical sense, it must be real. That means you have to have realistic skills that you can put into place in real fights where people are going to get killed. And so that's on the what you get taught. So, for example, if you're talking about MMA, okay, well, so when's the last time that anybody in the MMA world kicked another guy purposefully in the nuts when he was laying on the ground?
Mm-hmm.
Or when he had him smashed against the wall, two of his buddies came into the room and one of them stabbed the guy.
Yeah.
Because that's the shit that happens in real fights, right? So if you're not training for that, then you're just playing a game, right?
Yeah.
So it's a good game, and it's definitely true that you would like to have like good mixed martial arts guys on your side to get in a fight because they have a lot of the skills that are useful, but they're still training for the game, right? So with that being said, for it to be real, you have to take that next step. It's not just grappling like jiu-jitsu. It's grappling like jiu-jitsu with strikes and with weapons and with more than one guy involved on either side.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's what it really is, right? And how do you know if you're fighting a guy that's got a blade on him? Like, you don't. Most of the time you find out like this, shit, I'm in a knife fight, right? Like, so if you are playing around fighting people and not assuming they're armed, like you are in every single jiu-jitsu gym in the whole world, well, then you're not really training for fighting, all right? Because that's something that's going to happen in real fight. Now, that doesn't mean the skill, you don't start with that. That's the fundamentals, right? Jiu-jitsu, MMA, boxing, kickboxing, those are fundamental skills, and they're good to train. And you have to kind of start out with that. But then at some point, you got to put it in perspective of what happens in real fights. And that takes it to that next level. Now, the other level of analysis is, what's the difference between training a unit, any unit in the world? Like, imagine, classified freaking direct action units, right? What's the difference between training those guys or members of the Ranger Regiment or the 4th Infantry Division or the Marine Corps or the SEALs or whatever, and training at some local martial arts EGM? And the difference is motivation. Everybody who's coming through the door into the martial arts gym is paying to be there and to learn the skill. And so the easiest thing in the whole world is how to teach people who are self-motivated a skill they want to learn. Okay, so now compare that to any unit. There's no such thing as a unit in the world where everybody is self-motivated to learn how to fight, unless the leaders have created that environment, right? And that's so rare as to be.
Yeah.
Like the best units in the world, I can tell you how they do it. They have a contract, teacher who's available in the building, and the people who are self-motivated go train with him, and the people who don't, avoid it.
Yeah.
And that's it. So there's no such thing as like a unit where everybody is excellent at hand-to-hand combat.
Yeah.
There's no such thing, right? Like there can be, there could be, right?
Yeah.
There could be, but there typically isn't, because it's just way down on the list. And by the time you got really good units, everybody's self-motivated and they kind of let them train themselves.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So that's the big difference. And it's also why, for example, when military units try to hire outside instructors, they don't have any idea how to do the task, because it's a completely different task to train a bunch of self-motivated people as to lead them to be self-motivated. And that's what leadership is, right? It's providing purpose, direction, and motivation. So what's the key phrase there? Where does the motivation come from? The leader provides it. If you ever find yourself in charge of a bunch of unmotivated people, it's your fault. You're not the leader they need.
That's a good point. I think for folks that have not been in the military, I think they would kind of find that shocking when you said, it might be the coolest stuff in the world, but the military is really good at taking cool stuff and turn it into work and turn it into a job.
Also, too, just imagine you're the top guy imagine you're like the most elite top guys in any service, the Marine Corps, Navy, Army, etc. Okay. And if you grew up in an era whenever hand-to-hand combat training and skill wasn't required, which was all of us, right? Like, okay, well then you get to the top of your game and now somebody comes along and says, well, you kind of must know this. And so there's like ego issues to not want to, because what happens when you step out on the mat with somebody who's just rolling like in jiu-jitsu? Somebody gets beat. You know what I mean? Now imagine you're the top dog and all of a sudden you're facing this, like public humiliation, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
And so there's great resistance. I mean, we used to, I always tell the joke, we used to sell T-shirts that said, we both know why you don't like combatives. Right? And it's fucking true, man. Right? Like at the end of the day, you can be a stony killer, best gunfighter in the world, but boy, there's a whole lot of people proficient at guns that don't want to learn to fight because you might get your ass whipped in the training.
Yeah. It's a good point. I like it.
They're bad news and poking people in the eye for being pansies. I love people pansies.
Well, let's move on to. Man, that's so fascinating. I would like to do another one where we just kind of get geeked out on the combative stuff, because I'm really interested in the point where you talked about the psychology of it and everything. And I think I wouldn't do it justice if we got into that and for our time, and that really needs its own thing. So I hope that you'll come back and we can do that. Yeah. So let's shift off, because you're a prolific writer. You write a lot of good some stuff that, here you are teaching people how to smash other dudes. And then all of a sudden, I mean, a warrior and a scholar, like literally, I like it. So there was this post, everybody needs to go to Matt Larson's Substack, but there was one on there that jumped out at me. It was called Manhood and Honor, or maybe it was Honor and Manhood, I think is the name of it. It's kind of an older one that you posted a while back, but man, a lot of good stuff in there. So I never thought in my life I would reach the age of maturity where we would have to be defining genders. Like, what is a woman? What is a man? So we're definitely not we're not going to go full retard and do that. But I think that we need to reevaluate some of these terms that I think everybody used to just take for granted, but now through modernity have kind of either the principles or the concepts, whatever you want to call it, have just kind of atrophied. They're not as strong in the culture like they used to be. They're not as respected, I think. And one of those would be honor, right? So we got to define our terms. So, I mean, what does honor mean to you?
Okay, so that's a really deep subject, right? So let me start with this. Okay, our culture has a long history, and over the course of our culture's history, and I'm just going to go all the way to the Greeks as far as this conversation, but it goes deeper than that, right? But if you go all the way back to the Greeks, like their idea, if you read what's thought of as honor in like the Iliad and all that, their idea of honor was like public looking, as in it was about your reputation, about what other people thought of you.
Mm-hmm.
And as the Romans kind of took over in the culture, that idea, um, it it grew, and it grew in this way. It has kind of a two sort of meanings. One is that same meaning, and you get that sense in like when you bestow an honor upon somebody,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like the word honor there, it means that public accolades, so to speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, but the Romans started realizing it was not just that; it was the qualities that make somebody um, the person who should receive those honors,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that's more like being a person of conscience, a person who can be counted on, a person whose internal um, character is driving them to do the right thing and be what we would call an honorable person. And I think that, as it came forward into our culture, became increasingly wrapped up into what it means to be a person of character. And so I would say that that's kind of what it means, today is to be.
Mm-hmm.
It means to be a person of character, and
Yeah.
and let's take that a step forward, because there's a lot of aspects wrapped into that. But just imagine, why do we have like such a litigious society that we have now? Well, one of the reasons is because people are less honorable.
Mm-hmm.
Like imagine this. We have a rash of people now who are like the manosphere types, the hustler type, who's
Mm-hmm.
well. So if your goal is self-driven, it's about your accomplishments, and that's what drives you, then you can have a whole lot of dishonorable things that you don't notice that are hurting that effort. You know what I mean? Like, it's clearly not honorable to get over in somebody in business, right? A good business deal, both people are happy with, because both people were honest, knew what they were getting into, and both of them were happy with the deal. That's an honorable deal. That's the kind of deal you could shake hands on, and both people will come through. But if you're trying to get over on them, if you're trying to be tricky or something like that, well, that's a dishonorable thing. Somebody's going to be upset when it's all said and done. And that person, because there was no honor in the deal, that's the person who's going to have to be litigious at this point, right? So you get what I mean? So,
Yeah.
so if you think about that, and I would also say there's an element of playing your role, who you are in society. Because, for example, it's probably dishonorable to exploit the people who are under you. Or not, it's dishonorable to exploit the people who are under you if you're in some position of power. You know what I mean? Like part of the measure of your honor is what you do with your power. If you're the head of something, are you the head of it for everybody, or just for you, or just for the people of your caste, even, right?
Mm-hmm.
So you can start breaking it down like at many, many levels, but it all comes back to that sense of conscience. You have something inside you that's driving you to try to be a good person. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that there's any, and you might not, the answer may be no, but just, you don't know if you don't ask. So do you think that there's anything about how the word or the concept of honor has changed over the aeons that maybe isn't that worthy, or maybe is dysfunctional, or is there
Well, I would say it
anything like
plays
that?
on the rest of our values. And what I should mention before I say that is, when we say the word values, like we give lip service to stuff all the time, duty, et cetera, et cetera. And lip service isn't enough. And if it descends into platitudes where we're just like, honor's a good one, honorable thing to do, be an honorable man, et cetera. It's really easy to just like gloss over what it actually means without getting deeper into it.
Yeah.
And we do that a lot. And then as we do that a lot, well, then sometimes these questions they don't even get asked, right? And especially as our value structures, and what I mean that, let me back up one more step. When I say my values or your values or an organization's values, right? Here's what I mean. Values are the things you actually place value upon. Okay, that's what the word means. It means these are the things that I place value upon. Those are my values, and yours the same. And an organization's values are aspirational, as in, the Army and the Marine Corps and Navy, they produce a list of values, and they say these are the Navy's values, these are the Army's values. Well, those are aspirational, as in we would be better as an organization if people in this organization placed value upon these things. So we're going to try to encourage. Okay? But you actually get your values from the things that happen in your life and the way you live. So for example, one of the Army's values is selfless service. Well, I'm always critiquing that one, because that means that if you're going to have that as an actual value, the people who serve selflessly should get ahead, right? If it's not, if you serve selfishly and that leads you to get ahead more, then the actual value of the organization isn't selfless service. You see what I mean by that? So it's the same. Like, you can say that you value honesty, but is honesty something that gets you ahead, or does it hurt you? Right? And our values, they come out in our actions, and it doesn't matter what you say you value. It matters what you do, because you're going to actually act upon your real values, whatever they happen to be, and they may not be the things that you claim to value.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting.
I get a great example of this. So this is the way it kind of works. Once upon a time, I had the chief of staff of the Army in the Army Combative School. Back before it was even the Army Combative School. And so he had a big entourage with him. It was like 30 guys. So I asked the group, I'm like, who's the best runner in the group? And they were all like, Major Longlegs. He just won the Marine Corps Marathon or whatever, right? So I'm like, cool, good on you. I too value fitness, right? I'm like, who's the best shot? And now there were crickets. Nobody had any idea. And I'm like, okay, well, who's the best fighter? And they were like, once again, silence. Nobody had any idea. So what you're telling me is that this unit values, meaning places value upon running ability, but does not value shooting ability or fighting ability, which is cool if we're going to run from the enemy, right? But if we're going to run towards the enemy, that other shit's going to become more important, right? Yeah. Now here's the question. Why did they value running but not shooting? Because they would tell you they valued shooting, right? But they didn't, because nobody knew who was good at it. Okay, so the reason is because that unit, like every other unit in the Army, goes on a run 3 days a week, and they see who sucks at it and who doesn't. So it's all public, right? Okay, so last time they went to the range, who knew how they did? Right, so probably just them and the person who helped them finger whip their score, and then the clerk that it got. But nobody's coming down on the guy making fun of him because he sucks at shooting, right? Yeah. And the same thing with fighting. If you're not fighting all the time, you don't know who's good at it, right? So organizations, you come by their values by the way the leaders structure their life, because they create that group dynamic. This is the psychology aspect, right? How do you lead an organization such that you are thinking about the values that your leadership and the things you have them do are inculcating into the people in the formation? That's what you have to do if you would if you want to have an organization. It doesn't matter if we're talking about a civilian company. If you don't get the people to value excellence, they will not achieve excellence. They have to value it. It has to be something that they actually want, that they really place value upon. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one, man. That's a rabbit hole we could get into real deep on that. Because I like how you even go back to the Greeks and stuff, because I do a lot of that when I do solo episodes. My poor audience, man, they've heard me geek out on Beowulf and the Saxons and stuff so much on that.
So a great example, right? What are our stories of our culture for? Yeah. They're for passing down values. They're a social technology to help you pass down values. Yeah.
And so I'm really glad that I've got somebody else on here that will they're like, oh no, now there's two of you. Okay. So, I was saying, cause I'm actually working on a post now about honor, and also a little bit of how it's changed. But I think, in modernity, just with our everybody's so obsessed with like just comfort, consumption, and that kind of thing, that a lot of these virtues or values get watered down over time. And I think honor now, it's not really that a term that is that much in vogue anymore. You do hear it like, oh, and it usually comes down kind of like what you said. It's either as someone who's an honest person or someone who's receiving an award or some kind of esteem. And that's really, and it can be those things. I think even in antiquity, yeah, it could carry that. But it's really in those ancient cultures, then something I think we've lost because we're so hyper individualized now is just how honor was so much tied to your obligations and duties within the community, that honor and to live for honor became more important than life. You'd rather die than to fail or do something dishonorable within your community. And I was researching some things about the Spartans and how they kind of have the brand on, elite warriors from antiquity, right? But that their whole society, they really didn't need a motivation. You don't see a lot of like inspirational stuff because their society was around that, to where you had your guys to your left and your right. And I think anybody that's been in the military knows that what this is like, that kind of the group cohesion and that dynamic of seeing your buddy and not being outdone in a friendly way, to not be outdone by your buddy or not to let them down. That the whole culture from the time you went into the agoge, when you're 7 or 9, to the time you became a citizen at 30 and you aged out, like everything is just built around that. And it's so hard, I think, today, because again, if you're not in the military, if you're not in law enforcement, and even then, it's not a guarantee that you're going to have it. It just gives you opportunities to pursue it. That it's really hard for the individual to go beyond that surface level of honor.
So consider this about not just the Spartans, but other sort of societies that what they did. There's a meme out there about hard times make hard men, etc.
Mm-hmm.
And soft, then hard men make soft times, and soft times make good men. Yeah. I mean, soft men, and then soft men make hard times, right? So, okay, so there's a little truth in that. But the thing that is, when you think through the Spartans, is that they figured out a way culturally to break that cycle. And they broke the cycle by making sure that everyone grew up in hard times. You know what I mean? So when you were a young man, you were put already over into the harsh training. So you had the portion of your life when you were receiving love from your mother so you could be a well-adapted human being. And then, because if you don't have that part of your life, for example, we know that people who are abused children they're more susceptible to PTSD, right? So just for example. But with that being said, if you have that, then it's not, when you start to get into adolescence, that's when you start to become a man, right? As you start to become a man, they initiated that, the rites of passage and all that stuff that we typically do now at the end of our teenage years. They did it then, when you're entering puberty. And so then they lived their whole life in like an infantry platoon sort of environment. Yeah. And so then they could break that cycle. They could keep it going generation after generation to keep people focused on being hard, right? And another element of that is this. It's like, imagine when we're trying to get a group of people, let's just say 30 men, right? Like a platoon-sized unit. When we're trying to get 30 men to be the best possible group of men that we can, best team that we can. Okay, there's a dynamic that is required there. And the dynamic is first that we must push each other towards excellence. Okay, so what does that look like? Well, let's just use jiu-jitsu as an example. But shooting works the same. Every skill works the same, right? First off, we put an element of competition into it. So when we go to the range, we're publishing the scores. Everybody knows who sucks and everybody knows who's good. And we're going to all be trying, because there's going to be ridicule at the bottom and there's going to be accolades at the top. We're all going to be trying to be better because there's social pressure to be better. Right? Same thing. We're in a mat room where everybody's rolling all the time. We will figure out a pecking order based upon who's good at it. Because when you're rolling with a guy, he's judging you and you're judging him. And if you suck, you're getting a reputation as somebody that they don't necessarily want on their side to fight because you suck, right? And then, so that's the same, like I talked about the run earlier. You're on that run, you're judging each other. The guys who suck at it, they're letting everybody down, they're publicly humiliating themselves, etc. So that's the first part of what's required, is we have to have that competition going so that we're driving, we're all like individually motivated to try to do as good as we can. But there's another portion of that as well, which is, imagine I'm with somebody and I'm rolling with them and I'm just smashing them because I'm way better than them. Well, my life depends upon this guy's ability too. Right? So I can't just smash it. It's not only about the pecking order. It's also got to be about, I got to bring him along. You know, when a guy falls out of a run, what's he really doing besides humiliating himself, which he's definitely doing that. But he's also hollering out that he needs help. You know, he needs the support of the group to say, okay, well, you're not going to take it off Tuesday. You're going for a run. We're taking you with us, and you're going to make sure you get better because our lives depend upon you. Right? So there's that dynamic in an organization like a platoon or like a Spartan is about, how do we achieve excellence and stay focused together that drives that sort of thing. And that's the real lesson of what the Spartans did. How do they keep it? And you can see that lesson in other cultures too. You know, like whenever how long did the Japanese have almost total peace under the shogunates?
Oh yeah, it was like
managed to keep a warrior culture alive through all that time. Because
it was like over 200 years.
Yeah,
I mean, 200, 250.
It's wars going on, but they had warriors and they were proficient and they kept their virtues as warriors and they, et cetera, et cetera. So that's a cultural answer to that problem, right? Like, and if you think about, that's one of my larger missions, I would say. I'll come back to that in a minute, but one of my larger missions is, how do we capture that sort of dynamic in our culture so that we continue to have virtues, warrior virtues, that make our society, able to survive, because of how we structured ourselves and how we raise our sons. How do we? And there's a constant fight against that, from a separate group, but we have to be like smart about it. How are we doing it, right? What are we trying to accomplish? What kind of virtues do we want them to have? What sort of values does somebody who goes through our processes that we have as a culture have whenever they come out to be 18, 22, 30 years old, etc.?
Are we at the point now to where you see really the only answer to make that happen is it's going to be from the individual pushing it up and out, like the dad with the son?
So the answer is yes, sort of, but it's also the collective, in that we form a group. You and I talking together, we've never met before, but I'm sure we agree on a whole lot of the things we need to do, that sort of thing. And as we start talking and then start affecting it, like if you go back through some of my other Substack articles, like I'm talking about scouting and about, high school football and about like all those things, those are tools that we have in our culture that have been under attack, that we have let be twisted, that we have lost a lot of what they used to do for our society. You know what I mean? And so we can purposefully engineer those sort of things, and we can. Think like scouting is a great example, right? How did scouting start? Well, Baden Powell was a war hero, and he wrote a book about what the scouts in the Army did during the Boer War and how to be an effective scout. Boys started reading it because it was an adventure story. Then he wrote how you can play the game of scouting. That became the Boy Scouts, right? And so it was actually about that. And if you think about like everything that's going on in an old traditional scouting troop, it was basically, here's how platoons operate in the wild, right? Like you have You have a troop. Well, that's a platoon. You have patrols. Well, those are squads. And here are the mechanisms that you use when you're planning an expedition. That's whatever your mission happens to be. We're going to go down this river. We're going to blah, blah, blah. We're going to build this bridge. It doesn't make any difference. Those same principles that was teaching young men. You know what I mean? So that was the purpose of it. Like it was that. It was, okay, so it's been lost largely, and that's not what it is anymore, but it can be, and it doesn't have to be in the big national organization, which has been, under attack. It's not actually any different than if you and me and some of our buddies get together and take the boys of our neighborhood out on a camping trip, right?
Right.
Now, we also, with that being said, there's a lot of lessons learned from that experience, like the freaking molestation shit and all that stuff. Yeah. Well, those are all things that you could structurally, beat. You can just say, okay, well, it's inappropriate for one boy to be with one man and blah, blah, blah. There's lots of structural things you can do to beat a lot of that stuff. And you just have to build that in, right? But at the end of the day, you're really trying to get at that same thing. And Alex, here's another thing to think about. It's another one of the larger projects thing, right? But do you ever notice that our warrior culture, like across our warrior culture, we have all these organizations that are basically stovepiped to one portion of the mission, and they are not connected. You know what I'm saying? So we have the Army, right? Okay, we have the Veterans Administration, which is completely disconnected from warfighting, right? Completely. There's no overlap whatsoever. It's like, okay, we're through with you. Now you're over here where they just take care of you. Yeah. And we have like the VFW and the American Legion and whatnot. Also disconnected from the VA and disconnected from the Army. And we don't have any connection between any of those things and how we're raising our young boys. Like they're not connected at all. Like it's like completely stovepiped thing. Okay, so what that tells you is that we have a broken and fragmented warrior culture. You know what I mean? Because we have plenty of men with the skills and the leadership abilities and the experience and lots. We have lots and lots and lots of those people. What we don't have is anyone organizing it. So we're using that guy who was a platoon sergeant in the Ranger Regiment to be a Boy Scout leader whenever he's in his 60s because he knows what these boys need to learn in order to be men. You know what I'm saying? I'm not even just talking about the skills, right? Like it's not necessarily about planning a freaking expedition, although that's what Boy Scouts do, right? But it's more about all the things you learn while you're doing that. Right? It's like, I'll give you another example. Right? So why do we have our children play sports? Right? Well, most of us, because we enjoyed them as kids, and that's it. And then we want them to do it too. But nobody puts their kid in the basketball because if they don't have good ball handling skills by the time they're 25, they're fucked and they're not going to be able to be successful in life. It's not about the skill whatsoever, right? Yeah. Like it's not about that. So what is it about? Well, it's about all the things you learn when you're on a team like that. So for example, our two hockey teams, are they competing or are they cooperating? And the answer is both, right? They're competing because they both want to win, but they're cooperating on the rules. Okay, not just that, but on each team, they're cooperating because they want to make as good a team as they can, but they're also competing for social status on that team, right? Okay, so it's that sophisticated dance of cooperation and competition, doing both at the same time at various levels that you're really learning when you're playing on a baseball team or a football team or whatever, right? And the reason you need to know that is because that's what we do as adults. That's what's going on between Coke and Pepsi, right? They are competing with each other, but within the rules. And what are the rules? Well, the law and business ethics and et cetera, right? But they're competing. They both want to do better. Yeah. But within that cooperation on the things that make our society function. And then the same thing is true within the company. It's better to be the CEO than it is to be the guy in the mailroom, right? But we both, the CEO and the mailroom guy, want Coke to do well, so they keep their jobs, etc. Right? So we're competing and cooperating at all those levels. Everything we do, like if If you're running an electrical contracting business, you're doing the same thing that you were doing on the baseball team when you were 12. You're getting along with people to make a better unit, cooperating, although you would still like to be advancing and becoming a leader, etc. And you want to beat that other team, but it's not worth cheating, right? And then back to kind of what our thing about honor, right? Imagine this. When you're talking about those kind of things, it's like, why is it better to be an honest person? Well, it's better to be an honest person because honest people have better outcomes in life. Because what happens if you're a dishonest person? Well, eventually you get outed. And then you're no longer in the trustworthy group. And then you don't get to play anymore. Yeah. It's like, because life isn't like a game, right? It is, but it's an iterative game. And what I mean by that is like you play again and again and again and again. So how do you win an iterative game? You win an iterative game because you keep getting invited to play. Right? And if you stop being invited to play because you were known to be a cheater, then you don't get to play anymore. You lose. That's how you lose the game, right? So you were discussing that you were a lawyer, right? So imagine that profession, right? Like, what do you do to not get invited back to play anymore? Yeah. There's a lot of stuff. They're like, you did that. You're not a lawyer anymore. Yeah. None of us respect you, right? Yeah. Right? You're out. And so look, that's what happened to Pete Rose, right? Be the best guy in baseball. And then you break this honorable rule that we have set up together, and you are no longer invited to play. It doesn't matter how good you are. We don't trust you. You can't be involved. Yeah. That's what happened to General Petraeus. Undoubtedly the top soldier of his generation. Broke the rules and no longer invited to play. Right? So that's why you should be an honest person. Yeah. Yeah. Because it functions like that, right? Yeah. See what I mean?
Yeah. And, there's so many of these virtues like that Aristotle and Plato, that all the greats wrote about, and they're often intertwined. It's hard to talk about one without the other, but just in those examples you've listed is just how there's that aspect of discipline that's tied in with honor. Like that's why people
loyalty.
Yeah. I mean, that's why I think people admire honorable people, because they know that those people, that it takes discipline to live that way, and not everybody has it.
Yeah. And I'm always amazed, right? Like I'm genuinely amazed whenever I routinely hear about people who operate as if they didn't have a mother. You know what I mean? It's like, what would your mom think if she heard what you were doing, right? Yeah. What would your grandmother think? Yeah. If you don't pass that sort of thing down to your children, if our society doesn't pass that sort of thing down, well, then they become bad people, dishonorable people. Yeah. The sort of people who go through the life hurting all the people in their lives because they're selfish, right? Yeah. Like that's the structure and the system that we have to, at this point, rebuild. Yeah. You know what I mean? In order to make it, like I said, that's a great example. My grandmother was a wonderful person. I don't ever remember her doing anything that wasn't motivated by at least what seemed like the right motives, right? Yeah. So I remember one time, it was a funny story my mother used to tell when I was a little boy. My grandma was praising me, was walking along beside her, and she's like, "You're such a good boy, Matt," And apparently I said, after a while, "I'm not always good, Granny." So, like, okay, so if you don't have that sense of shame, how are you going to end up accomplishing anything in life, man? Because at the end of the day, you're going to just go through life stepping on toes and making enemies and leaving people who won't deal with you,
Yeah. Well, so we've kind of covered the honor stuff. Let's shift to the manhood portion of the. Okay. Let's kind of flesh that out a little bit. We're kind of getting low on time, but so manhood. I'm not asking you to define what a man is, or although that's that. I'm sure we could have a good conversation on that, but just with manhood in general, what do you see as like the biggest challenge for men right now in the age we're living in right now.
General, what men need to be able to do is be a functioning part of a coalition. I mean, they need to be able to be in a group of men and perform their role such that the other men respect them. Okay, so with that being said, that's your role on the job site. That's your role in an infantry platoon. It's the same thing, right? You have to be the sort of man, sort of person that other men will respect and that they can count on. Okay, and that really tells you something, because what is missing. Well, let me just say this. So, as a non-commissioned officer in the Army, what you really do is you take the young men who come into the Army from whatever background they've had, and then you teach them how to be men. Okay, so that includes all kind of shit. It includes, like, in the old days, it was like teaching them how to balance a checkbook because they had no idea how to do it, right? Like all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so with that being said, all that actually amounts to is being the sort of person. Well, let me say one more thing. I can tell, and still can easily, whether or not a man grew up with a father, like in his life, who was a man, right? And the reason you can tell is because what does a father teach his son? A father teaches his son that being a man means taking care of the people who count on you. Like, that's what it is, right? You have these people who count on you, and you must take care of them, provide for them, etc. You know, if the people in your life don't feel better when you're around, if they don't feel secure in their life because they can count on you, if they, you know what I mean? Like, if you're not the sort of person who provides the people in your life that sort of comfort, right, then you're not a good man. Like, it comes down to that, right? And so what you see on the guys who don't have a father teaching them that is they're like more violent, they're more, they are quick to anger, they, the opposite of what it means to be somebody who can do that, because it's performative to them. It's like performative manner. Like, I don't actually care who the toughest, big mouth is, in the organization or in the world. I'm, studiously unimpressed by people who are impressed by themselves, right? Like, if they're a shit talker, if they're, and our society, right now, we reward that. Because instead of having like an honor society or even a production society now, like, you don't get a good reputation in our society now by being somebody who produces, right? And who's steady, and you get your reputation by who can get the most attention. So we have an attention society now, right? And everybody's out there like jazz hands, right? Like, check me out, right? And then they're doing like anything they can, because that translates directly into dollars and, blah, 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 blah. It's back to what we were talking about at the very beginning about honor, right? Like, it's like, that's the opposite, So gaining attention by doing something, even something great, like, you're the greatest athlete in the world and you're personally a piece of shit. Okay. So you're a dishonorable person, like would you want think about some of the people we hold up in our society. Would you want your son to grow up and be those people?
Yeah.
Right. Would you want your son to be the one who's got 5 baby mamas? Right. Or whatever, the guy who was, left a string of people behind him who hate him because he rooked them in business, but he's rich, got a big car, got all the, flashy women around him or whatnot. All of them who are around him only because of the money, blah, 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 right? Like, all the dishonorable traits. So that is the opposite of what it means to be a man, to be a good man. And like I said, we're missing an element of shame,
Yeah.
Like, shame is a mechanism by which we police each other to be good people. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and in today's, in today's current, social currency, it's like nobody wants to, like, that. Shame's a bad word. You bring that up, everybody wants to avoid it. They want to stigmatize just the fact that you would even want to introduce that into the culture. Everybody's trying to avoid that. And It's really,
what happens
we need a dose of
I
it.
mean, everybody, I'm going to say this, and all your listeners probably are right on board, so they're all going to get it, agree straight away. But it's really true, right? Like, imagine this, right? When are all the things that our society used to police in people's behavior? Okay, so we acted as if they were all oppressive, and you had to like throw those things off to be free, right?
Mm-hmm.
It all became about self-expression, et cetera, et cetera. And then who pays? Because I'll give you a great example, right? So, look, I'm on my third wife, so don't anybody think that I'm freaking bad mouthing everybody who's ever been divorced. But who pays for divorce? Children pay, right? And children pay because their parents can't be adults, can't get along, can't have commitment, can't have a sense of duty. You know, like it's the poor traits of the parents are paid for by the children.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? And so that's like across the board, all those things. We pay as a society and as individuals because of we blowing off all these mechanisms. So let me put it to you this way, right? When you walk into the library, right? You know, I work at West Point. We have a great library. When you walk into the library, what should you feel? Well, you should probably feel a sense of awe because you're surrounded by all the things that people valued enough to collect them and keep them for the next generations, right? That's what the library is. It's the work and words and wisdom of the smartest people who ever lived, all in that building. Like, that's something to be in awe of, right? Okay, so you know what else is like that? Our religions and our culture. You know what I mean? Like even if you don't believe in the metaphysics, right? Even if you don't believe in the metaphysics, you got to appreciate that the religions are what drove they're where all the lessons get captured by every grandma who ever lived. You know what I mean? Like they're into that. And so when you blow off all those like lessons learned from all that time, it's the most arrogant thing you could possibly do. I'm smarter than all the people who ever lived, and I'm going to do my own thing. And those people are just oppressing me to try to make me follow all those rules. You know what I mean? And we pay for them constantly as a society and as individuals because everybody blows that shit off. You know what I mean? I look, and a lot of stuff's like, you know, all the way back to we were talking about the Greeks, et cetera, through our history, right? Okay, so why is it that we treat everyone equal before the law in our culture? Why is that? Right? Because we're the only culture that does that. Not any other culture treats everyone equal before the law. Okay, so why do we do it? Well, we do it because there's a biblical idea that we're all made in the image of God. And because, you know, and look, you don't have to believe in the metaphysics at all to know that that's actually true. That is why we do it, because we have this religious history where that idea was ensconced in our religion. And so therefore we carry it forward today when you're standing in court of the lowest lowlife who's clearly a murderer, right? It's clearly like raped a 6-year-old or something. We still treat that person as if there's a spark of divinity in them because of our religious tradition. You see what I mean? So like I said, don't have to get wrapped in the metaphysics to respect it, because that's a powerful idea, you know, and it's one of the things that our society was built upon. You know what I mean? And so that's what I say about have that sense of reverence for our culture too. You know? I heard somebody say one time, it's the smartest thing ever. You know, what does it take? What does wisdom take? You know, what does it take to guide ourselves forward as an individual and as a society, et cetera, right? Like, what does it take? Well, I don't remember who it was. I was telling the story of the Egyptian religion, and basically, the story is the wise old God is the father of everything, but who's also somewhat blind and sort of aloof, gets killed or fights his brother Set. So it's the precursor to Satan, right? So Set destroys him and spreads him all out in the underworld. And then the offspring of the original God comes back and fights the brother and beats him, right? But he doesn't rule himself, which he could have. I don't remember the story, but anyway, they don't rule themselves. They lost their eye in the fight, so instead of like ruling themselves, they brought the eye to the father, put them back together, rule together. And the point of the story is, what does it take? Well, it takes the wisdom of the ages. That's our culture. Everything that everybody passed down, that's the library. That's our religious stories and lessons and etc. Right? That's the wisdom of the ages. But it's also the vision of youth, because the world is ongoing and you can't be blind to those changes that are going on. You know, like here we are at the time whenever the entire 20th century paradigm of consolidated control of information through, you know, CBS, NBC News and blah, 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 has blown away because we have the internet. And not just that, all the gatekeepers to that stuff are getting blown away because people can freaking produce with AI now. And so we have this whole new paradigm happening that if we are not looking to the lessons of the past, it will take us in some crazy direction.
Yeah.
You know? So that's kind of my central message is that.
Yeah. Yeah. So, all right. So let's say you got a guy that's listening to this and he's like, yeah, man, I want to be a man of honor. I see I'm living in this declining civilization. What do I do?
Second, right? Let's catch right there.
Yeah.
Is the civilization declining? Well, it has been. You know, the ideas of the 20th century have come to fruition. So there's a lot of those, and they've come to fruition. And now we're at this point where our civilization has lost its sense of self-worth. Okay. So that's the first thing, is we have to value our culture, right? Because, you know, if you don't value your own culture, then what are you standing up for? What are you fighting for? What's the purpose? You know what I mean? So that's the first thing, is we have to change that. And we change that by realizing this culture, the one that we were born into and grew up into, or adopted, right? You know, certainly just as I heard a thing the other day of Scalia, before he was a Supreme Court justice, talking about how his family was Italian, but he had adopted the American culture, you know, and like everything he thought about right and wrong came mostly from that. And of course, our cultures get lessons learned from many cultures, but you get the idea. And so you can completely adopt our culture. But this is the culture, you know, for example, that exterminated the slavery from the world. You know what I mean? That wasn't any other culture in all of history as our culture. We did that. We decided, okay, we're not going to have this anymore. Not just us. We're not going to have it in the world.
Yeah.
Shut it down everywhere. You know, that was our culture, right? You know, we're the culture that brought, you know, who just many examples. I don't have to list them all, but you get the idea. So start with that, and then that drives you forward. So we're no longer declining. We're confident in who we are.
Yeah. All right. So valuing your culture. And then, I mean, what do you recommend dudes that are just starting out? I mean, that want to, I guess what I'm saying is, you know, when I read your posts, to me, and, you know, I come away with, it's finding meaning, you know what I mean? Because we are in modernity where the hierarchical structures have just kind of been dismantled, right? And the things that were guiding human beings, you know, since the dawn of time, you know, just aren't there. You know, the religion, I mean, you may as an individual have a religion, but the society, it's not there anymore. You know, the society's not promoting the religion. The society's not promoting standards, you know, and then pretty soon you just kind of become, you could very easily just kind of go the way the rest of society, which is going into nihilism, right? So when I read your post, I really see it. I always come away with like, it's finding the meaning, the grounding, through these values, through your actions, being a man of action, linking up with other people who value the same thing, those types of things. So, meaning, right? I guess and I kind of lost my train of thought, but I guess I'm trying to say
let me jump in. Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
We're far enough into the podcast now where anybody who's listening is ready to hear what I'm about to say. So
yeah.
I want to tell it. Okay.
All right.
So I was the Combatives guy, right? And then a bunch of the Combatives guys, the ones who were the originals, all the original like badasses who helped me start the program. We're all adults now, you know what I mean? I started doing this stuff when I was in my 20s and started Ranger when I was 21 and was in Marines at 17. So we're adults now. I'm 58 years old, right? So the military in general has been struggling with a suicide issue for many years now, right? And here's the stuff that people don't know about it, but the most frequent time when people commit suicide is whenever they get out. So that's if after your first tour or it's after 25 or 30 years in. That's the danger time, right? Okay, so what does that time represent? Why is that the case? Well, the positive psychologists figured out a while ago that there's 3 paths to genuine happiness, right? There may be more to it than this, but just bear with me, okay? The first one is savoring the moment. That's the old advice of stop and smell the roses, right? I'm here at a dinner with my lovely wife or beautiful woman or whoever it is. It's a white table, well, the food's good, great wine, sunset. Look at this, man. You know what I mean? Like, savor the moment. Enjoy what it is. Like, look at this conversation we're having. I'm having fun. It's a great conversation. Let's savor the moment for a second.
Yeah.
Let's kick ass.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's that old advice. The second way is immersive experiences or flow state. So, for example, when you're skydiving, you are not thinking about your bills.
Yeah.
So, when you're kickboxing, you are not thinking about, you're just in the moment, right? And there's a lot of ways to catch that. You can catch that when you're painting. You know what I mean? Like where you're into the thing, really into it. Like, so immersive experiences. And I should mention that can go bad as well, because the reasons why people become alcoholics and become drug addicts and et cetera is they're chasing that immersive experience because whenever you're like high, it's very similar in the fact that you're no longer worried about your bills, right? So it frees you from like anxiety and et cetera. Okay, so well, all that said, that can be positive or negative, right? But both of those methods, they are ephemeral, and meaning like while you're doing it, while you're enjoying the moment, or while you're rolling or whatever, you're not thinking about your bills. But as soon as you're done, there's going to be a little bit of a high afterwards because the experience was great. But pretty soon you're just thinking about your bills again, right? So the way that lasts is to have a sense of mission, a sense of meaning, something you're living for. And so the military gives that to you. When you're a soldier, you're clearly serving something bigger.
Yeah.
Right? And so whenever people leave that environment or that role, they often lose that sense of meaning. And that's that drop of sense of meaning. You imagine now, a minute ago, you were an airborne ranger or a Navy SEAL or whatever, something, bolt fuel specialist, it doesn't matter, something that was serving something higher. And now you got some mundane civilian job that seems pointless to you, right? So that's the danger time. Okay, so so I have a whole thing about, like, that's actually why I'm writing the whole thing. And I have the belt system for the Combatives. There's all these different efforts that are along the same lines, but they're all about giving people a sense of mission. So what I mean by that is, you've all heard the sheepdog analogy that Dave Grossman used to do. He used to say, still says, but people are, either sheep or wolves or sheepdogs, and the sheepdogs protect the sheep from the wolves, right? So I don't like the analogy. And the reason I don't like it is because it separates the people from the protectors, right? And the truth is, sheepdogs don't really give a shit about sheep. they only are protecting them because there's a shepherd, right? So it's a little bit of a Christian analogy that works there, which I kind of like. But at the end of the day, if there wasn't a shepherd, the sheepdogs would be preying on the sheep, right? Because they would be the freaking wolves, right? So you get the idea. So I don't like it, right? I like instead the idea of, why do the bulls protect the herd? The bulls protect the herd because they love the herd. They're of the herd. It's their family, right? That's a much better analogy. So now just think about this. If you're a bull of the herd, that means everywhere you go in life, the other members of the herd are better off because you're there. I'm sitting there eating dinner in a Luby's, right? Then the people in the Luby's with me are better off, because if somebody starts to choke, I know what to do. If there's a mass shooting event, I know what to do. If there's a car wreck, I know what to do. I'm a trained person. And so that gives you a reason to keep your training up, which gives you a reason to get in those immersive experiences, right? And also a sense of mission in life. I'm a man in this culture. I provide for the people who I protect and provide for the people who count on me. And I'm here and wherever I am in life because I do my part, and I train, and I keep my skills up, and I keep myself fit, and I eat right, and I do all the crap. Everybody else is better off because I'm here.
Yeah.
So now, like I said about being later in the podcast, you can see that that's like an anti-suicide mission. But we found out a long time ago that if you address suicide directly, you get more suicide, because it's a idea pathogen, right? It's like, don't think of the red truck. We're all thinking about red trucks. Okay. Don't commit suicide. Now we're all thinking about suicide. So that suicidal ideation starts there. It starts with an idea. Yeah. It's passed on. So it's better not to mention it, right? It's better to just encourage people to train. It's better to encourage people to be a good man. It's better to tell them you have a sense of mission because the people in your life count on you. Yeah. And if there's nobody in your life who counts on you, find some people.
Find someone.
Help, right?
Yeah.
And it doesn't really even matter how.
Yeah.
Right? It just matters that you have a sense of mission, that you can help some people, right? Yeah. So
and not even just, for folks that are struggling with depression and stuff, but I mean, it just goes back to that first question about, like, if you're just sitting on the couch and you're like, man, I need to get after it, but what? I mean, there's your blueprint right there, and you tailor it to yourself. I mean, that's perfect.
And everybody's got their own skills, right? Like, I'm not an accountant, but there are people who need accountants, and they need them for good causes. And why don't you help them? Yeah. And that's as important as it could be to be a great shot or a good fighter or you know what I mean? Like, if we, right? The ones who are trying to be good men, the ones who are trying to hold societies, provide, protect, hold society on our back, if we take that sort of attitude, then there's somebody who's stepping up to help the young boys. There's somebody who's taking care of the veterans and the old ladies. There's somebody who's all the things that are needed, because that stuff has meaning.
Yeah.
And that's the answer. And like I said, I got a lot of combat experience, and I know all about all the demons and all that kind of crap. And so I'm part of that world, But the answer is, if you are focused on what you can do and be, then you can have a reason to get past that shit, right? Because it's when you lose track of that, you're in trouble, right?
Yeah, man, that's awesome. That's awesome, Matt. I really appreciate you coming in and just really enjoyed this talk, man. This is a lot of stuff, a lot of good stuff that I know people are going to find value in. So before I let you go, man, why don't you tell us, like, what's the best way to, like, if they want to follow you, see what you're doing, what's the best way that people can find you?
So I would say the best way is my Substack. That's where I put most of my effort in. I also have the Combatives University, which is the belt system for combatives. And that's for people who are interested in or who are pursuing, learning to be a good fighter, shooter, warrior type. It's not for everybody, but it's for a lot of people. And it's not a school in the sense of, like, you're not going to go on my stuff and there's going to be me teaching you techniques or anything like that, because I think there's so much of that out there that it's not something I need to do. It's more like a revival of the idea of chivalry. And let me kind of explain for a second. Imagine chivalry gets a lot of airtime now, but mostly in a negative way, as a system of respect and how you treat women and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's why it gets badmouthed by the feminists and etc. But chivalry wasn't really that. That's all stuff that was invented in like the 18th, 19th centuries, as you know, in literature and whatnot. But what chivalry was actually in medieval Europe was, cheval means horse, right? It's the way of the mounted warrior. That's what it meant. So what it really was a path towards how you were respected and gained wealth and fame in that environment. So just imagine for a second, how did you get to be a wealthy guy in medieval France or England? Well, some rich guy gave you land in exchange for military service, right? So why would he do that? He would do that because you were a badass, right? Because he wanted you on his team. Okay, well, how would he know that? Well, because there was a path that was called deeds of arms, right? Things that you did to prove your worth as a warrior. And so that was, started at the lowest level. It was, tournament victories and jousts, and then local conflicts, and then expeditionary wars. And then as you did that and you gained, people under you, so you're in charge more, you gain more and more. So you can imagine it's a system. And Geoffrey de Charny basically spelled it out in a book called The Knight's Own Book of Chivalry about how it all worked. And as an exemplar of it, you can look at William Marshall's like the greatest knight in English history. He started out as a tournament champion. He was eventually the most important person in the whole country, deciding who would be king, because he was a fucking badass. And there was lots of other badasses who wanted to follow him, right? Okay, so the belt system is an attempt to revive that sort of thing, to give people deeds that they can prove themselves, right? And which is another way of saying, look, pursue training so that you will have the skills. It's basically fighting skills, feats of strength, and lifting and whatnot, first aid skills, marksmanship skills, those sort of things. And if you pursue that, then I can give you credit for being a badass. And all the guys who are black belts, you can look on the Combatives University, it's got a list of them. These are the actual baddest dudes in the United States of America today. It's the top soldiers, top Marines, top SEALs, etc. Like when somebody comes along and they have that skill set that emerged as America's martial art, if you will, during the War on Terror, you know what you want the guy next to you to be with when you're in battle. You want to be a good shot. You want to be a good fighter. You want to be strong. You want to have good cardio. You want to be able to fix you up if you're wounded. It's that guy, right? That's the guy that we say, he proved himself. Here he is. Right? So that's another place you can look for me. So most of my Substack, but also the Combatives University, which is that people are into that sort of thing.
Awesome. I'll make sure I put it in the show notes. And man, I do hope you'll come back, because there were a lot of stuff that we could have got into that was really good. I'd love to have you back. Really interested on the psychology of how that's linked with combatives. Man, I would love to geek out on that with you. So Matt Larson, man, famed of song and legend. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next time.
All right, brother. Thanks. Good to see you.
All right. Thank you. All right, gang. Until next time, stay sharp and keep it pearl snap.